And okay, there we go. Okay, the first thing I just want to say is Raphael wants me to let you know that the videos, so while I had provided links for the past 4 weeks of videos, I guess it requires you to put your name in. And I guess that violates, for anybody who's from Bank of America, that is a problem. You're not supposed to do that, just in case you did. Don't worry about it. But so we posted them to YouTube, and he put those links out on the site that you guys are all accessing from Bank of America. So it's behind your firewall now instead of outside it. So in case you do want to rewatch class, that's where it is. And I'll let everybody know when I send a note out tomorrow, just to say, hey, for anybody for Bank of America, Jacqueline and Jared, for you, if you need to watch it, it's sitting out on Brightspace, the NYU space. So you guys just do status quo for that. Okay. Okay, great. Okay. Homework. I want to say you guys did a great job. I think the hardest thing was second party data. I had a bunch of people who reached out to me and we chatted, and um I think you guys did a really excellent job on it. Thoughts on second party data? Anybody like have a revelation, or feel like, wow, yeah, I have actually been involved in receiving that benefit of someone getting second party data or something like that? Thoughts? It's so many different ideas. A lot of you had a lot of different approaches.
A
Any
lot,
thoughts?
we use a lot of third-party data, but we are starting to use some second-party data for
Yep.
kind of mining for our MarTech uh, department. So it was interesting to read about like what exactly it was and how that was used,
Hmm.
how it kind of combined with our first-party data and also our third-party data. We really don't use much zero-party data that I'm aware of, anyways.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
Well,
Others?
I
Go ahead, Lena.
appreciated doing the exercise because I work in zero party data and I don't. So it's interesting. I don't know if anybody else from the Bank of America team, like Scott and Steve or Lynn, if you guys work in third party data. I don't. But maybe you guys do. I always work in like it's client and like,
Mhm.
we're always going and trying to zero party at best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I think we talked about this last week. I mean, I think being in the banking world, the financial world, the world of confidentiality is probably a lot different than if you're sitting in a consumer product. So anyway, sorry, Scott, were you gonna?
No, I was going to say, I mean, there's third-party data, right, that we onboard like IXI and Exium and so forth. So it does exist. It's just, you know, things change, I think, with regard to how you can use that data. So that's
Mhm.
always a challenge, especially if you're talking about credit. And so there's always a lot of legal sign-offs, right, before using some of that data.
Yeah, I can
So my
imagine.
question around second-party data is, if you're advertising, say, on Facebook, and you're trying to target your audience through Facebook's algorithm, is that considered second party, or?
Depends on how you get it, how you get the data. Okay.
Mhm.
So that if you're doing something on Facebook and you acquire names through Facebook, right? Yes, that would be second party data.
Mhm.
Facebook cannot give you so I don't know if you remember a few years ago, it was during an
Yeah.
election. I don't know. It might have even been 2016. I don't recall, but where Facebook actually handed over the names and you know, contact info, people bought the data, right? And then targeted them during the election and stuff like that. Okay, they don't do that stuff anymore,
No,
right?
but if the data stays within Facebook, but you're just targeting using Facebook as your sourced, I guess, marketing provider.
You would do that. That's aggregated data. That's third party data.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's usually when I think of Facebook, as really much more third-party aggregated types of data, although you can in some ways get second party data, but things have really been locked down with in the world of social. And I just think that, you know, I think the way I usually start with this is I think about hypothetically, what would be some ideal data for me to get if I was going to use the idea of second party data is to add depth and breadth, right, to your first and zero party data. So if you're going to do that, ideally, what would I love to get, right? And then what can I really get? And it's hard. It's hard to get the data. And I think that, you know, for the purposes of what we're doing, as you do your final project, think about ideally what you might want. Don't worry about the rules. But don't ask for Facebook data. I think that because I'll probably say you're probably not going to get that. But there are a lot of other types of, you know, branded relationships you can have. There are other places that you can get data. I know, Scott, you mentioned Axiom. You had mentioned it in your work as well as just now. Axiom does multiple things. They actually have data, right? They're an aggregator, but they also are a matcher,
Mhm.
right? So they sit in between. And one of the things that one of you brought up, and I actually have done this as well, is, you know, you can go to a supplier like a Nielsen, right? Or a supplier that has names of people and purchasing habits. And then you can get a company like an Axiom. They basically glue your data to their data, and it extends the depth, basically, and breadth of what you've got, and then you can learn a lot more. So that's one way to do second party data. Another way to do second party data, and the weirdest thing is it just happened today. I had a real live example on second party data. Not that I didn't have one before, but so I got a text today from like DoorDash or one of Uber Eats. It was Uber Eats, right? And it said, "Hey Debbie, I know you love these yogurts. You can order them from us, blah blah." And I thought, how do you know about that? Then I thought, oh, a day ago I bought those exact yogurts in Stop and Shop. For anybody who doesn't know, that's an East Coast retailer, right? And then I was like, oh, Stop and Shop shared, and I use my frequent shopper data, my frequent shopper card at Stop and Shop, and I have an Uber Eats account. They shared and they matched the data together. So Uber Eats contacted me, basically sent me a text trying to get me to do food delivery, et cetera. But there's a live example of second party data, right? Extending reach, right? They were promoting it to me, trying to make it easy, et cetera.
We
Okay.
used to, I used to do media planning for CPG. And for one of our products that had, it was a laundry detergent brand. And so it would go on sale and we would work with partners who would marry the data together just like that, using like the membership number.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
it's
totally.
creepy when it happens to you.
It is really, really creepy, especially when we're actually talking about it.
Yeah.
That was what was extra creepy about it. I was like, wait a
So,
minute. Thank
I
you for
have
the
a
example. Go ahead.
question related to the project because of this. Two of them actually. One, for the final project, you were talking about how Axiom can match to Nielsen and blah, blah,
Mhm.
blah. Are we expected to know what all the companies can do? Like, is that part of our research? Should I be, okay, cool. Thank
Absolutely
you.
not.
The second
Don't worry
one,
about that. Some people, you know, like you might have ideas coming out of this, like, you know, for example, I think Lynn, you had an idea of like matching with Ulta, right? Did you talk about Ulta?
Yeah.
It was interesting, like, or kids games, or I can't remember everybody's different ideas, but just use your imagination. You can have those ideas. Don't worry about if they can really happen or not. This was, you know, coming up with ideas. How would you use second party data? What does second party data look like? You know, how is it different than zero and first party data? What does it do for you? Because what we're trying to do here is to really launch a product, right? And then see how it does. It's about the communication.
so
But for us to be able to do that, we need to be able to extend our reach if you decide that's the right thing to do. Sorry.
Yeah, so that was the next question is we are talking about the examples of second party data, and the next thing out, like the next breath was, how creepy was that? So would it be the wrong choice for me in my final project to not choose any second party data?
But
Because
it's all right.
creepy?
It's
Like-
okay. Because for today, for the project for this week, everybody needed to think about second party data and at least talk about what it would be and how to be used. For your final project, you do not need to use second party data. Okay.
Okay.
But you'll need to show for the project, and we're going to spend a good amount of time tonight kind of going through stuff for the final project. You will need to demonstrate that you understand the different components of what we've learned and how to put all those pieces together to launch an advertising campaign and to evaluate it. And I know we haven't got to evaluate yet because that's next week, but tonight we'll talk about experimentation and kind of pre-testing just a little bit. Does that help?
Okay. Thanks. Yes.
Okay. But
Thank you.
yeah, no problem at all. But well done, everybody. There were some great examples, as I said. So, okay. Any other comments on second party data? Anything like that? No? Okay. Let's talk about this week's stuff that you saw in the videos. Okay, experimentation. That's kind of where I'm going to focus for a bit because that is going to be the homework assignment for next week, and I'll talk about that. But I want to talk about experimentation. Have any of you felt like you were part of an experiment, like some marketing company or brand's experiment ever? And you go, you know, I couldn't find that product in any other store. It was only in one store. You know, that's an interesting ad. I never saw it before. Or, you know, anybody?
No real world example like that, but my job is performance marketing. So this is what I do day in and day out, A/B test on the website. And then since being in this role and the heavier emphasis on performance marketing, I've been able to notice on other competitor websites, like, oh, on one browser, it was showing this, and now I'm on my personal computer and like it looks like this. So I feel like I have been better at identifying at least like digital A/B tests like that, but not retail.
Yep. Yep.
I
Okay. Go
I
ahead.
shop in New Jersey because I live in New Jersey, but I spend time down in the Outer Banks, and there's definitely clearly. I always tell my husband, I think the Outer Banks is a test market because they will have different versions of the same thing I buy at home, and I never see them anywhere else except down there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
different flavors, different sizes, different packaging.
Yeah.
And I've never seen them up here where I live or when I shop. So,
But would that be experimentation, or would that just be like a result of where the demand is for a certain
Depends.
product?
It depends. So I was
I
gonna, go ahead, Riley.
I've had the product experimentation when I was in college in my college town. The Chick-fil-A had mac and cheese before anywhere else in the country. But so I don't know if that's a marketing thing, but we had mac and cheese a year before everyone else, and that was
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. You can't necessarily tell when you are the person receiving the experiment, whether it's an experiment or not. You can just assume that it is. But what would define it as an experiment from the marketer's standpoint, right, or the brand standpoint, is if you're actually controlling the variables and if you're measuring it, right? And I'll give you some examples of some kind of test scenarios. So for example, let's say that you want to understand how advertising does, and you want to understand how much money you should spend against advertising, right? So there are a lot of ways to do it. If you've run your campaign before, right? And maybe if you have a marketing mix model, and not to jump to next week, and Jared, feel free to jump in because I know this is your world. You may be able to see the kind of lifts, could you get ROIs and lifts from in-market modeling. But if you have a new campaign and you're trying to understand what to do, you might do a controlled test market, okay? And this is an experiment. And the way that it would work is you would basically have, you would basically say, okay, I've got test market A, okay, and test market B, and then I'll have a control market or two control markets. And then basically in test market A, you have to keep things, something has to be a variable. So something changes and something has to stay the same, right? So think about like science class, right? So it's basically that. So in this case, my variable was the amount of money that I spent against my TV ad or my digital advertising. And what stayed the same was the creative. Okay. So then what I did was I said, okay, if I spend more in this market and what I'm going to measure, if I spend more here, use the same creative, then what's the metric that I will use to understand if something is better than another? So we looked at a lift in sales, right, as among other things. And we also ran, not to make this more complex, but because Joe talked about it, he talked about an ANOVA. We ran what's called an ANCOVA, but it's analysis of covariance and it smooths the data. And don't worry about it. And but the whole idea is that in doing that kind of control, you have two markets, that test, you've got two markets, each one's a test, you've got a control, and then you can look at which one gives you the greatest lift in sales. And that's a test. And that would be some way that someone might measure it. Does that make sense? Was that clear? So, you may go somewhere and you see the advertising for something, and maybe you go somewhere else and you don't see the advertising. That might be a creative test, right? Or talking about a shelf test. We were talking about this. Jacqueline, you might have mentioned this, like a store. Like you might go in, we were talking about this, and Lynn, you were talking about it as well. You might go into a store, and I can tell you this with CVS particularly, because I happen to work on it. Not at CVS, but when I was at Unilever, they were testing different store formats. Okay. So they would basically, what you have to do is you have to make sure you have the same demographics, right? Because you won't know if you have different demographics in the geographies that you're measuring, you'll have an issue. So you've got to keep your demographics the same. Or similar enough. You've got to have control stores. And then they had these new format stores. They had 5 of them in the US. And in these new format stores, they had beauty centers, and you could get your ears pierced, your hair colored, and all this other stuff that was going on. And basically what happened was they measured the incremental sales that they got from those test stores versus their regular stores, right? And they took into account the demographics. And they were able to make a decision whether they rolled those out or not, or where they could specifically strategically place those new format stores. So that is a test, like an experiment. Does that make sense? Okay. So in the case of what we're doing, when we think of an experiment, we need to figure out, where does an experiment fit in, in our whole social strategy, advertising development and launch. So a place that it might fit is, Jacqueline mentioned A/B testing in advertising. Has anybody done any type of A/B testing besides Jacqueline in advertising?
I've done a couple A/B tests here and there.
Yeah. Jacqueline, do you want to explain what an A/B test is?
Sure. So it is a test where you have, and we try to do one single isolated variable that changes. So for a social post, for example, we would have the exact same creative asset, but test the copy. So it is a call out about the technology of the car better than something that says build your own Range Rover or something like that, or vice versa. We could test the color of the car in the social asset. So copy stays exactly the same, targeting budget stays exactly the same behind it, but it's only the color of the car that's different. So the exact same image, just the color that's different. That's a social example that we use, but then similar theories or similar examples on the website too. Or for other campaigns, it could be testing different banner ads to see what one does better against the same target with the same budget. Basically just changing one thing and seeing what performs more.
Got it. Thank you very much. Does everybody understand that? So let me just take it further. In the case of our social strategy game, basically, so we've basically gone from, we've talked about data, we can create targets, we can now, figure out who we want to talk to, right? And maybe we did some of you mentioned doing qualitative with, our zero party, people who were, part of the zero party population or the first party or whatever it happens to be. And we learn more, we know what to say, what we're going to say in our advertising. Now we need to decide, is this advertising any good, right? So maybe we develop a couple of different ads and we say, okay, I need to figure out which one of these I'm going to run. So maybe you go live with, 2 of them, and you hold certain things constant, like maybe the target is the same, but you use different ads and you see which ones get more interest or more lift, purchase interest, which is, I'm not sure if for the group from Bank of America, if you use kind of some sort of proxy for purchase interest. I would imagine that you do some engagement or something like that. But, in the kind of consumer products world, you'd look at a purchase interest number or something like that, or interest awareness, whatever you decide it is. So that's what we're going to be doing, is we're going to create experiments, and it's going to be to evaluate the advertising, really. Does that make sense to everyone? Don't overcomplicate it. Think about it as a pretty straightforward type of an exercise in terms of an experiment. You're going to have some communication or advertising, creative, whatever you want to call it. And we're going to use some experimentation to figure out what the best option is to run moving forward. Now, Mark talked about other things besides A/B. There could be test and control, right? You could show some people the ad, if you have, or you could have multiple ads, and then you can have a control group, and you could see which one of those creates the most interest, right? So there are different ways to do experiments. You could say, I'll give you another one. You could have an experiment in store. And you could have a pretend shelf. You could have the product on shelf, and you could have, how you walk in the store and they have like little, they're called shelf talkers, but little kind of advertising on the shelf, right? In a store, you go to Walmart or Target or whatever it happens to be, or a display. You could do an experiment to see which display works best. Maybe it's about social posts, what it happens to be, but where does experimentation fit in this? And how would you use it for social strategy? Is that clear?
I just have a quick question.
Yeah, for
Like
sure.
when you think about like retail and like the examples of like maybe different product sizes or flavors, I think, Lynn, that you had mentioned, like how do you account for differences in the people that shop at the stores? Like I know you said like you want some consistency in the demographic, but like if you think about like Walmart and Target, like those are, in my opinion, at least where we like in the Charlotte area, like it's truly different markets. Like
It is.
so like how do you account for that though and feel confident in your results? Like if there's a lift, in one of the stores, like to me, those aren't really consistent, like shopping experiences. So how do you account for that?
You mean that Charlotte is not representative of other regions of the United States, or do you mean Target and Walmart shoppers are different?
Target and Walmart shoppers are different.
We might do different tests in Target versus a test in Walmart, but you probably never do them in the same market, okay? Because in reality, there's a lot of cross shopping that happens in between Target and Walmart. Okay. I mean, there are people who are only Walmart shoppers and there are people who are only Target shoppers. But if there are Targets and Walmarts in the same metro, they're called metro areas, people do cross shop. Okay, so they're going to see it, and that might be reality. So what I will say is that you have to decide what you're going to control for, because the key is you want to have a valid experiment, to your point, Justine, right? You don't want to have noise so that when you get the results, you're questioning your results, right? So you have to decide what is valid. If people are going to cross shop, do you actually need to have it in both places? And you have different displays and then you have to account for it, right? Knowing that. Or do you just say, look, I'm going to, and I think Joe talked about this, and he was talking about it more theoretical in terms of how you set up your experiment in more of a, what different variables you test and stuff like that. But maybe you say, look, I'm going to test Target in Denver, right? And I'm going to use my Denver results to really figure out what I'm going to do for the rest of the country for Target. And I'm going to use my Walmart results in Charlotte to help me decide what I'm going to do in Walmart, right? And you might have different, just so you know, and this is a little, probably too much information, but they have very different rules on merchandising as well in those stores. So, and don't worry about dealing with that in your final project, but in reality, you might have to do the store separately. It depends. Okay, but you'd have to control. And the thing is when you go to do one of these experiments, it's not like you just go, I'm just going to throw it in this one store and I'm going to control it versus this store. You wind up basically picking a region of the country, right? So I did an advertising test and we managed it all in the state of Texas, which is quite unusual because normally you might use a couple different places. And we basically we did like a group of stores, like 25 stores that were in a particular region. And the key is it was a media test. You need to be able to contain the media. Think about that. You cannot have, it's called bleeding of your media. You cannot have your media bleed from one region to the other. So we had to know that it could be controlled, happened to be TV. Okay. So it's very easy to control it. So we had 3 regions. One of them was a control. So it was just as normal. One of them was a 25% lift in spending on advertising. Another one was 50% lift in advertising. We ran it for 2 months and we managed and looked at all the data and we matched the stores. And here's the key thing, Justine, this is part of your question. You might not have realized that you were asking it, but the whole part of an experiment, especially if you're doing it in a retail world, just in case one of you decides to do it, is that you've got to be able to, you need to know that the demographics all match, right? And the deals that retailers are putting out there, they all match. Because what you don't want is if you have a deal in one store, a promo, and you don't have a promo in another store, you're going to have higher sales here and lower sales here, and it will screw up the continuity of your data. Does that make sense? So
Right,
it is
so they're doing their
all
own-
about, it's all about data integrity. So setting up an experiment, the most important part of setting up your experiment, 2 most important things. What are the questions you're going to answer? And how are you going to manage the experiment, the controls and the variables?
So I have a question on that because the way we approach, by the way, the meal was okay. The rice was a little
Oh.
tough.
Thank you.
But so
no
I
pictures.
choose, yeah, but I choose to do a controlled environment. So when I think about an ad test, we typically copy test to
Yep.
weed out which collateral you want. And then we do an in-market test. We're always going to have a backup so we can switch to a more ideal creative if it's not performing as
Yep.
what we thought in the copy test. But the decisions are typically made like pre-market versus in-market. And then we might dial one up or down in market. And here it seems like a lot of this is you're advocating in market stuff. So where would you kind of draw the line between the efficiencies between one or the other?
Well, I would say that if you could do a bunch of stuff before you get to market, it may cost less money.
Yeah, that's my preference.
Yeah, because once you get to market, it's going to cost some money because you got to go live. Now, it depends on what type of media it is, right? if it's social, right? You need to make sure, the thing is, if you're doing pre-testing and you do an experiment there, you just need to make sure you simulate the exact type of environment that the live environment would be in, right? So sometimes you can and sometimes you can't, right? If you need people, you know, going through websites to find your stuff or being able to click in, maybe you can't simulate that in a test environment, and you need to go live, like in an a live AB environment, right? And the live ABs that I've done, to your point, Steve, I've always had a backup, right? So we run them, and it's hard to do it with TV. So it's digital, it's much easier because you can basically shut one off and just move the media.
Yeah.
So much easier. And even with non-linear TV now, it's much easier than linear TV, you know, the usual ABC, you know, NBC kind of stuff. Does that help?
Thank you. It does. I just wanted to just kind of figure that out because my head went straight to pre-market testing, decide on that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's fine. You can do your experiment anywhere or however you want. I think what's really important about the experiment is remember that you need to control variables. And let me flip to the assignment, because I do want to talk about the final project a bit. Okay. So can everybody see the assignment? See this? Everybody can see it? Okay. So when you put this together, I know it says in Word format. You can do it in Word. You can do it in PowerPoint. A couple people used PowerPoint. I don't care. Whatever's most comfortable for you is good for me. Okay. But you've got to spell out, where would you do this? Where is it of greatest benefit? You might do multiple experiments. You know, in prior classes, I've had students do multiple experiments. Don't feel pressure. Okay. And it isn't about necessarily, you know, the perfect technicalities, but this is really about, where would you do it? Why would you do it? What are you trying to measure? So what is your control? And then what are the variables? And then what will you learn from this? How will this help you move forward? Right? Does that make sense to everyone?
I'm sorry if we have covered this and I'm just blanking.
Don't worry, don't worry.
Have we gone over the different stages of the which research stage? Do we have that?
We're gonna do that next. Oh, I'm gonna do that next. Don't worry.
Amazing.
And
My
you
question
don't have to,
too, because I'm not used to product work at all.
yeah, so don't worry. We'll talk about research stages in a few minutes. And I know the one thing I will say is there's language that's used in some of these assignments that we don't cover, and that's why I'm going to make sure that we cover it in a minute, because I'm going to talk about the research plan, the final project, and we'll talk about those pieces, okay? So let me just change the words research stage, because just when would you do it? You don't have to say, I'm going to do it when I have this. You know what? When I have some advertising that I think is worth showing people, that's when I'm going to do it. That's all you need to say. Okay, there's not going to be a formal name. I'm not going to give you names to use for each stage. You're going to decide what the names are, and that's not a quiz or to make it harder. That should actually make it easier so that you can just use people words as opposed to research words to label things. Does that help? I don't want us to get hung up on specific terms, because, you know, different stakeholders, when you deal with different people, and I don't know how every organization works, but all I found is when I use research words with my marketing colleagues, they shut down, right? They want to hear like non-research. They want to hear real words, you know, that aren't about conjoints and things like that. So anyway, does that make sense? And I'll go through the sample learning plan in a minute, and then maybe that'll help. Okay, so the only other thing that I want to talk about before we go into the final project piece is do you guys use AI in your work at all? There was a lot of stuff about experimentation, and it was clearly not in there, AI. And I know that in future classes, there will be a little module on AI. It's still kind of coming together, but is anybody using AI in their work at all? No?
We're starting to look into it for creative development. So, we have asset shortages for different models of the cars.
Mhm.
So looking at different creative AI sources that would help spit those out quickly.
Yeah, yeah.
And
It's
we also use some sort of, or we're starting to try to use like predictive models that I think somewhere on the back end, I'm not as close with the development of it, but uses some sort of AI to essentially predict what cars somebody coming to the website would want to build.
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes sense. It's very tricky. I've used it in a couple of projects and it's very tricky in the sense that you have to really be working in a closed system because I'm sure it's if just let's say you're in Chat GPT, right? And you're doing something there, that is public, right? And so when you do stuff in there, you are training the model. And if someone asks the same question you did, afterwards, they get the learning if you put something in there, right? So if you do qualitative and you drop your learning in there and say, synthesize this for me, Chat, and it comes back, all your learning still sits in that public model. Just so you guys know that, I'm just letting you know. So any work that I've done so far has been in closed models, where like if I worked with a client, it was very closed and we put qualitative in it and the model learns, but it doesn't get shared with anyone outside of that. So I was just wondering, has anybody used any kind of neuro approach at all in any of your work, any advertising work or packaging work or anything like that?
I have had a few behavioral theories that I've learned from, actually my intern was taking, he was getting his master's and he was taking some behavioral class. And there was one theory about the justification of text on the right-hand side of the website, because that is the side where I think it's the left brain processes what you're reading. So having the text and the call to action focused on the right side was a test that we did because a lot of our website just naturally, because of the layout it is left justified. And we did see positive results from that, and the results were really great and I found it fascinating. Not as much neuro as I think honestly we should be on the website and for having people on there and things like that, but we're starting to dabble.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I think it's still a developing area. Same thing with the whole biometrics, which is kind of related a bit, but it is an interesting area. And still a lot to go there. So anyway, any questions on anything or any other discussion before we start to talk about the final project? Okay, so next week we have a guest speaker. She'll start about 7:30. Her name is Patty Gregory. She currently works for Kantar. Does everybody know who Kantar is? Have you guys ever heard of Kantar? Okay, so but she's been there for a few years, but prior to, and she'll introduce herself next week. She's got tons of experience, and her conversation next week will have nothing to do with Kantar at all. I'm just telling you where she's coming from. Next week, we're going to be talking about in-market evaluation of communication, advertising, things like that, and how we can think about optimizing or analyzing things once we go live with our creative, so that we can continue to make improvements, things like that. So she'll join us next week, and the videos that you'll watch before going into next week will talk a lot about in-market evaluation, campaign evaluation, okay? And that's kind of the tail end part of the research plan. So let me start with just a review. Can everybody see it, or do you want me to put it in presentation mode?
I
Is
can
it big
see.
enough?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so to review, the final project is for us to develop a detailed research plan. Okay. And the whole idea of this, and I'm not going to read every piece of text, I'm just going to kind of give you the overview. Okay. The idea is that you're going to build a plan that will help us understand who we should talk to, what the message should be, how to launch it, right? Maybe what media channels. I know we haven't talked about analysis of that, but you can just put a piece in about it, and then how we should evaluate it in market, right? That's what this is about. Don't get hung up on how much time. It says rough timeline here. No, don't worry about the timeline. Don't worry about how much it's going to cost. Okay. You can be hypothetical in many different ways. If you think of an idea and you're not sure if it could really happen, go with it. Just use it. Okay. As long as it's legit from a technically, I mean, sampling or something like that, that's fine. But the idea in here is that you're going to build in qualitative and quantitative. You're going to use zero-party data and second-party data, or whatever you decide you want to do, experiments, and then you'll evaluate something in market. So let me give you an idea of how to do this. Now, you don't have to follow this format, because you guys might have your own way that you want to do this. But in case you don't, feel free to lift this, okay? And I do suggest, the one thing I will ask, and I'm going to show you in a couple pages, is to use a certain format, because I want to see if you guys, this is about whether you understand everything we've done for the past 7 weeks, right? Okay, so it's a sample learning plan. We're calling it a research plan. I happen to call this just a personal preference. I call research plans. I think of research as the specific things we do, and a learning plan is everything on an overall basis. You can call it whatever you want. It doesn't make a difference to me. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to say, what are my objectives? So I'm going to start all this research. What are the things I want to know or learn when we complete the research, right? So I put some examples in here. And there's, again, no right or wrong answers. I'm totally going with what you guys have. I just want to make sure you understand, okay? Identify the creative approach that has the most potential with our core target audience, determine the optimal media channels, outline how to optimize, improve our creative or advertising once we are live. Feel free to lift these, or you can also, I'm not saying this is what it is. You may have a totally different take on it. You may only decide to do a couple of these things, or you may write them in your own words. I just happened to write these because I wanted to give you an example of what we would do. Okay. Now, the next thing I always like to do when I'm in a learning plan or a research plan is I like to do kind of a brain dump. Okay. And although I've set my objectives, I also like to make a list of what are all of the questions that I'm going to try to answer with this research, right? And we're going to work on this right now a little bit, and just everybody's going to throw out things. I'm just going to fill this in, and then you can pick and choose or whatever you want to do. Again, no right or wrong answer. But I just want to give you some examples. So there are some potential questions, and what I do is I say, okay, this is what I'm going to do with the research. Then I sit down and say, okay, what are the 25 different things I really want to know the answers to, right? I don't know if I'm going to get to them with this research, but these are the things I want to know. What are the gaps in my knowledge? Because if you don't list those things out, you might go off and do the research, and you may not even answer the questions you set out to do. So I like to write these down on a piece of paper, in a deck. So I started these, and we're going to fill them in. So let's, as a group, try to come up with like 10. So the first two I came up with, what types of games are popular and why? And then who's buying certain games? Like, what's important to them? Is it clear what we're trying to do? Everybody?
Hey,
Okay,
what-
just jump right in. No right or wrong answers. I'm gonna collect and then share.
How do people learn about a new game?
Excellent.
Where do they buy them?
Yep. What else?
What's important, like when they make the purchase? I know you said what is important before, but this is more about like
Mhm.
when they're actually
Mhm.
purchasing.
How often do people buy games? Buy new games?
What type of price point should we enter the market in?
Who do
Yeah.
people play games with?
Yep.
So what features are most attractive to people? Game features.
And to build on 9, like a 9A, what features are attractive about my game that I can lean into?
Maybe how does this game compare to competitors?
And then thinking about media plan and potential advertising, where do our consumers spend time online?
Yep.
With whom do they play the games and how often?
Um, was this part of the product development portion, but like, do people want a game where it's like a mix of a board game plus, what is the other half of it? It's like a mix of a board line, mix of online. Like, does that fall under product research or does that fall under here?
Yeah, so we won't change the components of the game. But maybe part of this, maybe Riley, that fits into what features in my game are most attractive that I can lean into.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Others? Any other questions you could think of?
What about something along the lines of word of mouth? You know, how do they find out? I mean, besides
Mhm.
advertising, is there word of mouth, type of talk about a game they want to play? I'm not sure exactly how to word it.
How about that? Word of mouth, important and from home, right?
Yep.
How about something about, we talked about, what can I lean into? Things, um, what about, visuals or anything else in the advertising?
Yeah, I mean, you talked about this at the start of the class, but it's like those shelf things that you said about how to draw the attention to it in store.
Yep.
And I guess we haven't decided on packaging yet, so you know what images will and just the product packaging.
And going off of that, beyond product packaging, what images for creative assets will be most appealing to people?
Are there geographic differences in where people play games?
So what type of gamer are they?
Any others?
I mean, would you lump sort of build on the geographic as well as demographics?
Yeah, If I write demo, does everybody know what demo means?
Yeah.
Demographic, okay. And this word of mouth, WOM is word of mouth. I just am abbreviating it. Oops. Sorry for my typos in here. I'll fix them. Anything else anybody can think of? We can come back to it. I'm just gonna keep going, okay? Okay, so what you'll do once you have these questions, and I'm gonna share the questions out, and you can build the questions out. My suggestion is that maybe you, typically what I do is I make this list of questions, and you don't have to have an exhaustive list of questions. This is just to kind of get us thinking, right? Because you may decide, like, Lynn, you may say, there's 18 things on here, but I really am only going to address 10 of them because only 10 of them are the key things I think we need to do, right? And then Scott, you may say, we're all 18. Lena, you may say, there's 4 of these, whatever it happens to be. I like to, if I have 20 on my list, I cluster them, right? I say, okay, these 4 belong together and I can do these with, X or however. And this kind of becomes my cheat sheet, right? As I start to move forward, because I try then to say, okay, as I go through each phase of my research, which of these questions am I going to answer? Does that make sense? Right? So for example, the next thing I did was, here are some potential steps or stages, right? So we've got our questions. So we're going to park that for a minute. We're going to say, okay, I've got these. I've looked at these. Okay, what are some potential things I might do? Well, I might start with, what do I already know? Right? And I'll show you what I have some examples of that. Then maybe I'm going to try to understand the audiences. And then maybe while I'm understanding audiences, and maybe I do that with some Xero first party data, and I'll show you the page on that. I identify the target audience and look at their habits and attitudes. And then maybe we create some advertising and try to understand it. And then maybe I figure out what's going on and what's working and not in creative approaches. Maybe I do some experimentation there. And then I probably launch it and I'll probably measure it in market, right? These are just some examples. So if we went to first step, what do we already know? Maybe what I would do is I'd start looking at like current purchase patterns. If we go back to the questions, maybe this would be, I'd start to say, okay, what would I already know? Okay, I might know some of these things might fit into this, right? I might review current research, create hypotheses, identify some of the gaps, right? And you don't have to do this. This is where I start. But if you, again, there are no great implications if you don't do it this way. The one thing I am going to ask is that you, when you do your phases though, you start with, what's the title of it? What are the questions we're going to answer? What's the approach and what's the output? And if you use this, that will take care of, if we go back to what the assignment was, this will cover off on everything in the assignment if you use those steps. Let's say the second thing I'm going to do is understand our audiences and identify the target audiences and define their habits and attitudes. Okay, what questions might I answer? Oh, well, what games are most popular? Who's playing each type of game and why and when? What's the opportunity audience? Why, et cetera, et cetera. How would I do this? Well, I'm probably going to go analyze Xero and first party data to do whatever. And then maybe I might identify some second party data that'll help extend, my understanding. I might even do some qualitative here, right? To really kind of talk to the target audience. And a number of you suggested that when you just did your work on the different data definitions. And maybe I'll try here, like I might talk to some people, understand what language they're using. Like, I don't mean, when I say language, I mean words they use, right? So maybe we'd have examples and we'd show people the game, or maybe they play the game, right? And maybe they play the game in this and we hear how people react and what they talk about, okay? Or maybe we show them concepts, ideas. Well, this is what we might say about this. What do you think? Or we show them packaging or something like that. But then we would know what to lean into for the advertising. Is this helpful? Is it
Yeah.
for anybody who's stressed about the final project? Is this alleviating any of your stress? Hopefully it's not making you more stressed. Yes, no, maybe?
This is helpful. 100%.
Yeah.
It's
I'm
helpful.
sorry, Jared, I didn't hear you.
And it's very helpful, yeah.
Okay, so we'll do more stuff next week and I'm conscious of our time. And I'm gonna share this out with you, but there are no right or wrong answers. Don't think because I wrote this on a piece of paper, this is what you have to give back. I just want to see this kind of a format. Question, the title, questions we're going to answer, approach, and output. I think it will be helpful, especially if you've never built a research plan before, to make an exhaustive list of questions, and I will send this out. List out the steps, things like that, and know what your overall objectives are. And you guys probably do that anyway when you're working on any kind of projects. If it's not a research plan or it's just a piece of research, it's always extremely helpful to do those things because then you know what you're trying to do. And then, I always like to think about what my output is going to be at the end, right? That's why I always have some objectives, here. What do I want to get at the end? What am I going to deliver? I would say for anyone, if you feel that you want to spend some time just chatting this through, we've still got a couple weeks. I'm pretty flexible time-wise, and I will be flexible. Just send me an email. I'm happy to spend time going through thoughts. If you put some stuff together and you say, am I close? Am I not close? Does this make sense? What do you think? Can you help me think this through? I'm more than happy to do that. There are no implications if you ask like, oh my gosh, I asked for help. Now my grade is, a problem. No, not at all. That's why I'm here. Okay. Does that make sense for everybody? Are we all good? How are you guys feeling? Okay. Good. Okay. Excellent. Okay. So you know what you're going to do for next week. When, again, coming back to the question that Riley asked, and I think Lynn said the same thing about what stage of the research, however you want to define it, it's probably going to be at the point where, it's either going to be something you're going to maybe test for in-store, maybe it will be something for before you go live with your advertising, or maybe, something like that. Don't worry, there's no formal name for it. You can just label it however you want. Okay. And if I don't understand, I will write you a note and say, I don't understand. And I'll ask you the question probably before I grade it if it's totally confusing to me. Okay. Are we all good? Any questions? Concerns? Stress? No? Okay. Okay, great. That's it. Thank you again, guys. Have a great evening. And yeah, and hopefully stay cool because I don't think any of us are in any place where it's below 80 degrees right now. So anyway, okay. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.